We are beginning with President Donald Trump and his relationship with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, Trump says he wants to make Brazil a major non-NATO ally, which would be the first by this president. This would put Brazil in the same positions like Israel, Argentina, Pakistan, and most recently, Afghanistan and Tunisia. He even floated the idea of bringing the country into NATO. Now, this idea falls in line with President Trump's growing pressure on the government of Venezuela. But Trump has been critical of NATO in the past and has criticized allies for not paying their fair share of NATO's cost. So is Trump changing his tune on the decade-old alliance? Well, to break it down, we turn to Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute. Thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks, Scotty.
With President Trump's previous criticism of NATO, why do you think he is adding non-member countries or even suggesting it?
Well, I think he's got some neocons whispering in his ear. The whole Venezuela regime change operation is not going well. I'm sure the president was promised it would be a cakewalk. The neocons love to use that term. We'd be greeted with open arms, when in fact everything they've tried to do has gone wrong. The provocation at the border with humanitarian aid has gone wrong. The idea of the military turning has gone wrong. Everything has gone wrong thus far, and so I think this is an opportunity for the president. And he's also having problems, by the way. The Lima Group, the other members of the Lima Group, have unanimously said we don't want our territory used as a staging ground for military intervention. So this may be a way of coaxing Brazil into a closer relationship so that the military option could be even further on the table.
Well, it's interesting that you say the word trying to coax Brazil into getting involved. Do you think this is just the president talking, or do you think he's actually going to try to put action behind this? As Brazil offers a lot, but I don't know if it necessarily offers it to the rest of the world as much as it would to the United States.
Well, I think this definitely has a lot to do with Venezuela. Things aren't going well there. They need some place where they can stage, if they're planning on a full-on occupation rather than some surgical strikes, they're going to need a place from which to stage this. They're sort of dangling this in front of Bolsonaro, who's considered to be close to Trump and actually admires Trump, is a way of bringing him in. Also, don't forget, Scotty, being a major non-NATO partner means that Brazil gets to buy all of America's military goodies in a preferential basis. So we're going to offer basically the only thing we still export, which is weapons of war.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because I think a lot of people were very interested yesterday when they heard this idea and wasn't familiar that there were 17 countries that have this non-NATO alliance, this type of term and these type of privileges applied to them. What do you know about this term? And what you mentioned a few, that they get to buy or use military equipment, but what are other perks that these countries get? And it seems like this is, you get the perk, but you don't necessarily have to pay in to NATO in the end.
Well, it just shows the drift of what NATO was all about. It was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was formed to fight a Soviet Union that, of course, no longer exists, a threat to Europe from a Soviet invasion which no longer exists. And after the end of the Cold War, they had to go around the world looking for new reasons to stay in business, to keep people with high-paid jobs. And so they uncovered things like Libya, which they completely botched, Afghanistan, which they've botched, and so on and so on. It's really an alliance in search of a purpose, and I think maybe Trump's neocon advisors have whispered in his ear, here's a neat new project for NATO.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. The other part about these advisors, I have to wonder, is NATO has not always been necessarily friendly to President Trump, if you've looked at past pictures of their gatherings. Do you think President Trump's new theory and approach with NATO might be, you know what, we're not going to be able to get rid of it, so I'm going to make it more Trumpian, whether I'm in office or not? Do you think he might also potentially see this as a way to go for other leaders around the world who might be more ideological like him and be more like him than necessarily what other leaders are within the organization already?
Yeah, it's the whole if you can't beat them, join them kind of thing. And who knows how deeply Trump's heart was in getting out of NATO in the first place. This kind of rhetoric is kind of red meat to some of his supporters. They're not too enthusiastic about these global organizations where it does seem like we pay the bulk of the budget and don't get much in return. But, you know, the whole idea of NATO, I mean, look, Germany has just announced that they're not even going to meet not only are they not going to meet their 2% GDP spending on military, they're actually reducing their spending. These countries are not afraid. They don't feel threatened. And so they don't, NATO basically is at a very expensive meeting club for them.
Well, a very expensive meeting club that unfortunately the taxpayers of the United States have to foot the bill for. Thank you so much for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks, Scotty.
Hey YouTube, thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this last video. We have a ton more great content just like this for you. So if you want more, make sure you go ahead and subscribe. And remember, never stop questioning more.